The autumn wind carried the scent of dying leaves and desperate prayers as Sarah pressed her back against the rough cabin door. Through the single window, she watched dust rise on the horizon where riders approached with the inevitability of winter itself. Her husband's debts had followed her into widowhood like hungry wolves, and today they would claim what remained of her crumbling world. The Apache warrior who dismounted first moved with the fluid grace of someone born to the saddle. Ayanna, the tribal leader, had called him when he came before, his dark eyes holding depths she dared not fathom. Behind him rode 3 others, their faces carved from stone and silence. Sarah's trembling fingers found the worn wedding ring she could not bear to sell, though it might have fed her for another month. As I tell this story of 2 hearts finding each other across impossible divides, I wonder where in the world you're listening from today, and what time it is in your corner of our shared sky. Ayanna's boots struck the porch with measured steps. When he spoke, his English carried the weight of mountains and the whisper of wind through canyon walls. Your husband's debt remains unpaid, Sarah Mitchell. We have come to collect what was promised. She lifted her chin with the last remnants of her pride, knowing that everything she was would change before the sun touched the western peaks. The journey to the Apache settlement stretched across landscapes Sarah had never imagined. Red stone formations rose like ancient cathedrals while her horse followed Ayanna's steady mare through winding canyon paths. Fear coiled in her stomach like a cold serpent, yet something unexpected tempered her terror. When her mount stumbled on loose shale, Ayanna's strong hand steadied both horse and rider without a word. The village appeared as the sun painted the mesa walls gold. Hide dwellings clustered near a crystal stream, smoke rising from cook fires where women tended children and men crafted tools. Sarah felt every curious gaze upon her pale skin and faded calico dress. She was a ghost among the living, a debt made flesh. Ayanna helped her dismount with surprising gentleness. His calloused palm lingered against hers for a heartbeat before he stepped away. An elderly woman approached, her weathered face kind despite the wariness in her dark eyes. She spoke rapid Apache to Ayanna, gesturing toward Sarah with what seemed like concern rather than hostility. Perhaps you're joining us from somewhere warm tonight, or maybe dawn is breaking in your part of the world as darkness falls here in this story. The woman, who Sarah would learn was called Grandmother Moon, led her toward a dwelling set apart from the others. Inside, buffalo robes and woven blankets created unexpected comfort. Sarah sank onto the soft furs, overwhelmed by exhaustion and uncertainty. Through the hide walls, she heard Ayanna's deep voice explaining her presence to the tribe, though she understood none of the flowing Apache words that would soon become as familiar as her own heartbeat. Dawn brought the sounds of a village awakening. Children's laughter mingled with the soft conversations of women preparing morning meals. Sarah emerged from her dwelling to find Grandmother Moon waiting with a bowl of warm broth and flat bread that tasted of corn and hope. The elderly woman's gestures were patient as she taught Sarah simple Apache words, pointing to objects and repeating their names with encouraging nods. By the 3rd day, Sarah had learned to grind corn with the other women, their initial suspicion melting into curious acceptance as she proved willing to work. Her hands, soft from her sheltered life, quickly blistered from the grinding stone, but she persisted without complaint. When a young boy fell from his horse and scraped his knee badly, Sarah instinctively reached for her small pouch of healing herbs. The child's mother watched nervously as Sarah cleaned the wound with gentle efficiency, applying a poultice of yarrow and sage she had gathered near her old cabin. The boy's tears stopped as the pain eased, and his mother's grateful smile needed no translation. Word of her healing knowledge spread through the village like wildfire. Ayanna observed from a distance, his expression unreadable as he watched this pale woman adapt to Apache ways with surprising grace. Sarah felt his dark gaze upon her as she worked, but when she looked up, he would turn away, his jaw set in lines she could not decipher. Each evening he brought firewood to Grandmother Moon's dwelling, stacking it with precise care before disappearing into the gathering dusk like a shadow with substance. The conversation came unexpectedly while Sarah gathered medicinal roots near the stream. Ayanna appeared from the cottonwoods like morning mist, his movements silent despite his imposing frame. She startled, nearly dropping her collection basket, but his raised hand signaled peace rather than threat. "You know the healing ways," he said in careful English, his voice deeper than the canyon winds. His eyes, which she had thought cold as winter stone, held unexpected warmth. "My wife knew such things before the sickness took her and our son." Sarah's hands stilled on the willow bark she had been stripping. The pain in his voice was raw as an open wound, and she recognized the familiar ache of loss that had carved hollow spaces in her own heart. "I am sorry for your grief," she whispered. "My husband died of fever. I could not save him despite all my knowledge." They sat beside the murmuring water as shadows lengthened. Iana spoke of his wife, Little Dove, who had laughed like spring rain and healed with gentle hands. Sarah shared memories of Thomas, whose kindness had been overshadowed by his weakness for gambling and drink. In the growing dusk, two wounded souls discovered the strange comfort of shared sorrow. When Iana finally rose to leave, he paused and looked back. "You are not what I expected, Sarah Mitchell. The debt brought you here, but perhaps the spirits had other plans." His words followed her into sleep that night, carrying possibilities she had not dared to imagine. The lessons began on a cool evening when Iana appeared at Grandmother Moon's fire with a worn leather pouch. Inside lay carved symbols etched into smooth river stones, each one representing a letter from the white man's alphabet. Sarah had offered to teach him English words in exchange for deeper knowledge of Apache healing traditions. His large fingers handled the delicate stones with surprising care as Sarah guided him through simple words. Tree became the Apache word for oak that grew by the sacred spring. Water flowed into the name of the stream that gave life to their village. Each exchange built a bridge between their worlds, one careful word at a time. As the fire crackled between them, "I find myself wondering where you're listening from tonight, and whether the stars shine as brightly in your part of the world as they do over this desert sanctuary." Iana's voice grew confident as he traced English letters in the dust, though his pronunciation carried the musical cadence of his native tongue. When Sarah struggled with the Apache word for healing plant, he moved closer to correct her tongue placement, his breath warm against her cheek. The moments stretched between them like a taut bowstring before he pulled away, clearing his throat. "You learn quickly," he said, gathering the stones with careful precision. "Perhaps tomorrow you will show me the white woman's way of preparing the fever root." Sarah nodded, aware that something fundamental had shifted in the space between them, something that made her heart flutter like captured bird wings seeking freedom. The crisis came with the dawn screams of a woman in difficult labor. Sarah rushed from her dwelling to find chaos surrounding the birthing lodge where Yellow Bird struggled to bring her first child into the world. The tribal healer, Old Bear, shook his graying head with grim resignation as the hours stretched without progress. Sarah knelt beside the exhausted mother, her trained hands assessing the situation with growing alarm. The baby had turned wrong, threatening both lives with each passing moment. She looked up to find Iana watching from the doorway, his face carved with concern for his cousin's wife. "I need your trust," she told Old Bear in halting Apache, then switched to English for Iana. "The baby must be turned, or we will lose them both." Iana translated her words, and after a tense moment, Old Bear stepped aside with reluctant dignity. Working with steady hands and whispered prayers, Sarah guided the infant into proper position. Yellow Bird's final push brought forth a healthy son, whose lusty cries announced his arrival to the rejoicing village. As Sarah cleaned the baby and placed him in his mother's arms, she felt the weight of many grateful gazes upon her. Later, as she washed blood from her hands in the stream, Iana approached with quiet steps. "You saved 2 lives today," he said simply. "The tribe will not forget." When he noticed her trembling fingers, still shaking from the intensity of the ordeal, he took her hands in his and held them steady until the tremors passed, his touch gentle as spring rain on desert flowers. Winter preparations consumed the village as the first frost touched the canyon walls. Sarah worked alongside the other women, smoking meat and gathering the last medicinal plants before snow would blanket the high country. Her hands had grown strong and sure, no longer the soft, pale things of her former life. Iana appeared beside her as she bundled dried sage, his arms laden with firewood for the communal stores. Together they worked in comfortable silence, their movements synchronized like dancers who had rehearsed the same steps for years. When she struggled with a heavy bundle, he lifted it effortlessly, their fingers brushing in the transfer. As winter approaches in this story, I'm curious where you are in the world right now and whether you're preparing for colder days ahead, or perhaps enjoying the warmth of a different season entirely. That evening, Iana brought fresh rabbit to Grandmother Moon's fire and stayed to share the meal. The old woman's knowing eyes twinkled as she excused herself early, leaving them alone with the crackling flames. Sarah felt bold enough to ask about his childhood, and he spoke of learning to hunt with his father, of sacred ceremonies and the weight of leadership that had fallen to him too young. "When I was small, I dreamed of traveling beyond the mesa," he said quietly. "Now I understand that home is not a place but the people who know your heart." His dark eyes found hers across the fire, and Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, like ice breaking apart to let spring water flow free once more. The riders appeared on the horizon like dark storm clouds, their dust trail visible for miles across the winter-brown grassland. Sarah's blood turned to ice when she recognized her brother's rigid posture in the saddle, flanked by a dozen armed settlers whose faces bore the hard lines of men seeking trouble. James Mitchell dismounted with military precision, his blue eyes scanning the village with undisguised disgust. Behind him rode Sheriff Crenshaw and several men Sarah recognized from town, their hands resting meaningfully on their gun belts. The peaceful morning shattered like glass as children scattered to their mothers and warriors emerged from their dwellings with weapons at the ready. Sarah, James called across the tense space between two worlds. You will come with us now. This charade has gone on long enough. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to obedience, but Sarah felt Ayana's presence beside her like a mountain that would not be moved. The tribal council gathered swiftly, their faces grave as they debated in rapid Apache. Some argued for peace, others for defiance. Old Bear spoke with passionate gestures toward the armed settlers, while Grandmother Moon's worried eyes found Sarah's across the circle. The weight of two cultures balanced on the edge of violence, with Sarah caught between them like a leaf in a whirlwind. Ayana's jaw set in stone as he stepped forward to face her brother. She came as payment for debt, he said in careful English. The debt is not yet satisfied. But Sarah heard something else in his words, a claim that went deeper than money or obligation, and her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. The standoff stretched like a bowstring pulled to breaking point. James stepped closer, his hand hovering near his pistol as he addressed Sarah directly. These savages have filled your head with nonsense, sister. You belong with civilized people, not living like an animal in the dirt. His words cut through the morning air like blade strikes, each one designed to wound. Sarah felt the collective intake of breath from the Apache women who had become her friends, who had taught her their ways with patience and kindness. She saw Yellow Bird clutching her healthy baby, the child whose life Sarah had saved. Grandmother Moon's weathered face showed hurt deeper than anger at the cruel words. Ayana's muscles tensed like a cougar preparing to spring, but Sarah stepped between the two men before violence could erupt. Her voice carried across the silent village with new strength born of certainty. I am not the same woman who left your world, James. I have found something here worth more than your approval. James' face darkened with rage. You have been brainwashed by these heathens. I am taking you home whether you come willingly or not. He gestured to his men, who began to spread out in a threatening formation. To prevent bloodshed, Sarah made the hardest choice of her life. She would go with her brother, but not because she belonged in his world. She would return to gather her few possessions and close that chapter forever. As she prepared to leave, Ayana caught her hand. This is not finished, he said quietly, his dark eyes promising more than words could convey. The messenger arrived at dawn, his horse lathered with sweat from hard riding through the night. Sarah recognized him as Running Wolf, one of Ayana's trusted scouts. His young face tight with desperation as he found her in the settlement's general store where she had been working to earn passage money. The sickness has come, he said in halting English, his dark eyes pleading. Many children burn with fever. Old Bear cannot stop it alone. Ayana asks if you will come. The formal request carried undertones of deeper emotion that made Sarah's heart clench with longing and purpose. James appeared in the doorway, his face darkening as he took in the Apache messenger. Absolutely not, Sarah. These people are not your responsibility anymore. You have obligations here to your own kind. His words fell on deaf ears as Sarah was already moving, gathering the medical supplies she had managed to acquire. Sometimes we face choices that define who we truly are, and I wonder what difficult decisions have shaped your own journey, wherever you might be listening from today. The ride back to the village felt like racing toward her true destiny. Sarah's mind cataloged symptoms and remedies as Running Wolf described the spreading illness. Children were the most vulnerable, their small bodies unable to fight the fever that had already claimed 2 lives. When the Apache settlement came into view, she saw smoke rising from too many morning fires. Ayana waited at the village edge, his relief visible as she dismounted. His strong hands steadied her, and for a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them. Welcome home, he said quietly, and Sarah knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she belonged. For 3 days and nights, Sarah fought death itself in the stuffy confines of the healing lodge. Her white woman's medicine combined with Old Bear's ancient wisdom created treatments neither culture had imagined alone. willow bark tea mixed with sacred sage, feverfew poultices enhanced with ceremonial prayers, and constant vigilance that blurred the line between healer and guardian angel. Ayana worked beside her without rest, carrying water, tending fires, and holding frightened children while she administered medicine. Their hands touched countless times as they passed remedies and comfort, each contact electric with unspoken feelings that had grown too large for silence. On the fourth dawn, the last fever broke. Little Star, Yellow Bird's precious son, opened clear eyes and asked for his mother in a strong voice that brought tears to every face in the lodge. The epidemic had been conquered through their combined efforts, and only 2 lives were lost instead of the dozens that might have perished. As dawn breaks on recovery in this story, I'm curious what time it is where you are right now, and whether you're watching the sun rise or set on your own new beginning. That evening, the tribal council gathered in solemn ceremony. Old Bear spoke with deep respect of Sarah's courage and skill, how she had risked everything to return when her people needed her most. When Ayana rose to address the circle, his voice carried the weight of formal decision and personal longing combined. Sarah Mitchell came as payment for debt, he declared to the assembled tribe. But she has given us far more than was owed. She has given us her heart, her healing hands, and her very life. I ask this council to release all obligation and welcome her as one of our own, if she will have us. The wedding ceremony took place beneath the spring moon when wildflowers painted the mesa with impossible colors. Sarah wore a dress of soft doeskin decorated with beadwork that told the story of her journey from stranger to beloved daughter of the tribe. Grandmother Moon had worked for weeks on the intricate patterns, each bead a prayer for happiness and long life. Ayana stood waiting in traditional dress, his strong frame dignified by ceremonial feathers and the carved bone necklace that marked him as a leader among his people. When their hands joined over the sacred fire, Sarah felt the last walls around her heart crumble into dust. The Apache words of binding flowed over them like honey, sweet with promise and hope. The celebration lasted through the night with dancing, storytelling, and the kind of joy that comes from witnessing love triumph over impossible odds. Even some settlers from town attended, their presence a sign that bridges could be built between worlds that had seemed forever divided. As our story ends with such hope and new beginnings, I'd love to know what time it is wherever you are in the world tonight, and whether love has found you as unexpectedly as it found Sarah and Ayana. Years later, as Sarah rocked their first child by the fire in their own lodge, she would remember the frightened woman who had once pressed her back against a cabin door. That woman could never have imagined the life that awaited her, the love that would heal her wounded heart, or the family that would grow from what began as a simple debt. Ayana would find her there in the firelight and smile, knowing that some payments bring riches beyond all measure.